Welcome to Unlocking Your Truth, another podcast by Dr. Leslie Phillips.
Well, hello, listeners. You are tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey.
Hello, everyone.
And as you know, Unlocking Your Truth is a talk show about metaphysics and spirituality. And I should mention that we are broadcasting from CIVL on 101.7 FM across the Fraser Valley from the unceded territory of the Stolo Nation. And we're delighted to be with you today, listeners, to inspire you and help you move forward in your life. We have a fantastic guest, and he's an expert in mindfulness. He's an expert in conflict resolution, and we can't wait to talk to him and ask him all sorts of questions. So let me introduce him. His name is Dr. Stephen Fulder, and he's an Englishman. He was born in London in 1946, and he's got a doctorate in molecular biology. He's published 14 books on outer and inner health, and he is the founder and senior teacher of an organization in Israel called Tovana, which is the Israel Insight Society. And this is the largest organization in that country that brings Dharma teachings to thousands of people every year. And Stephen's been teaching for 25 years, both in Israel and abroad. And he teaches retreats and courses and classes all around the world, especially for advanced practitioners. And he's also been deeply engaged in peace work in the Middle East. And he's got a new book out. And his new book is called Beyond Mindfulness, Waking Up to This Precious Life. And so we're going to ask him all about that book and the wisdom it contains. And he's going to help us today we're going to ask how can mindfulness and other methods that come from the Buddhist teachings assist us with the struggles of everyday life that we all go through. And we're also going to talk about conflict dispute in the family and at work and between groups. And of course, we're all human and we all go through these things. So how can we become the peacemakers in our life? So welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you very much. And I'm really delighted to be here and to be everywhere. Actually, the beauty of this media is that I can reach voices, I can reach people all over the world this way. And so it's really great to be here. Thank you.
It was wonderful. And, first of all, I want to ask you about your background, because I'm curious. And actually, there's some similarities in your background and mine, because I have a PhD in microbiology, and now I work as a spiritual teacher. So tell us a bit about your personal story of studying molecular biology and going on to be a teacher of Dharma teachings to thousands of people. How did that happen?
It proved to be interesting.
Yes, it's a really an interesting story. And basically, I have to thank the government of the UK that sent me to India, to Varanasi, to be a lecturer at the Banaras Hindu University in molecular biology and biochemistry. And I've always been really curious about the meaning of life, the meaning of reality, ever since I understood from reading the Jungle Book when I was about 8 years old, that if Mowgli thought he was a wolf because he was told he was a wolf, then the only reason that I think I'm Stephen is because someone told me I'm Stephen. So it sort of told me that the reality is not as a given. And therefore, when I went to India, I was delighted as a scientist to be able to be in a place, India, where exploring spirituality was in the street, was part of culture. And so what I did is I spent a lot of time with the sadhus and the spiritual teachers in India, more in fact than I was in the laboratory teaching biochemistry. And from there, I shifted my whole life. I did continue to use science as a tool, but towards healing, towards alternative medicine, towards inner healing and outer healing. So I shifted track. And then I learned to practice. And so I came to Israel from all kinds of accidents of life. And I started to create an organization in Israel that would support the Dharma teachings. That means the spiritual practice teachings, not theory and not concept, more like practice for liberation. That's the way I'm using the word Dharma. And it's been incredibly successful, and a lot of people all over the country are really benefiting from what we do. It's a huge organization now relative to the size of the country. So I'm really, grateful and delighted that it's grown like that. And I teach a lot of people, and it's basically beautiful. I'm still using now and then scientific tools, but basically I'm in love with the Dharma.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing that story. And I'm also curious because in the time span that you've been around, I'm sure in your earlier days in the West, meditation wasn't even a thing, or it was a thing that hippies might do. And then now we've just had this acceleration of the introduction of mindfulness and meditation into the West. And I know that your work is going beyond mindfulness and deepening it even more. So maybe you can comment on that process and where we're at with it and where
Absolutely.
it's going.
When I started, interest in Buddhism, Buddhist teachings were quite theoretical, quite conceptual, people reading a lot of books like Alan Watts and so on. But there wasn't really a ground of practice. And this wasn't what the Buddha taught. The Buddha only taught practice. He didn't teach concepts about practice. He didn't teach if you worship Buddha images. I mean, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. If you worship Buddha images, that's the way to go. The Buddha said, you can find liberation, and I include in the word liberation everything you're talking about in relation to spirituality. That means a real deep spiritual truth. You can find it in one place, and that is in the experience of the present moment. You just have to practice, and you find in the heart of experience a place which is basically perfect, because we're not made deformed. We are made pure, but we've got all this covering that kind of covers it over. So we have to uncover or remember something very pure inside us. This, to me, is a beautiful thing that's arrived in the Western world. I think it's it's culturally wonderful, and it's a little bit like thousands of years of Buddhist religious practice and religious forms, and all the hierarchy of religion and the priesthood and the lamas and so on have actually been left behind. And what's arrived is something that's very stripped down, namely practice more or less as the Buddha taught. So this to me is great. It's just that we need to keep going. Mindfulness, I'm really happy that it's existing, but it's a gate. We have to go through the gate into the garden. And in the garden, it's huge. There's so much there.
So these teachings, at least the gateway teachings, are reaching large numbers of people, businessmen, politicians, and so on. And I know that you have been involved in doing peace work in Israel and Palestine. And so perhaps you can give us a little bit of history about that and what you've done there, and apply it to some of the things that might be concerning people listening to our show, who do listen all over the world, but we've got people in the UK and we've got people in the US. And so how can we bring these practices and deepen these practices in order to bring peace and acceptance between us all?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been involved for many, many years because the Buddhist teaching, or the teaching of awareness, is meant to reduce suffering and is meant to kind of dilute our suffering. So clearly in the Middle East, the major source of suffering is the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, which everyone grows up in that conflict, and the kids grow up with anxiety and anger and fear. And so it's really a major source of suffering. So we had a number of programs, and one of them was really simple, and I want to talk about it and maybe illustrate some of the methods we used. And it was simply to take groups of Israelis over to the Palestinian territories for a weekend and use the core, I would say the core or the center of the practice that we used was on the second day, 1 hour in dyads, where one Israeli and one Palestinian would sit together and share each other's suffering. What is your life like, really? How do you live? What's the pain of your life? Each of them sharing their pain. And in that hour, in a way, peace was made. Because when someone is ready to share their deep struggle of life, you no longer see them as a Palestinian or as an Israeli or as a soldier or as a black person or white person. All the labels disappear. And in front of you is a human being struggling just like yourself. So that was the center, and in really peace was made in that hour. And then we had, after that, of course, sharing, expression. And before that, we did a lot of work on safety, that people feel relaxed with each other, feel safe with each other, friendliness, having tea and biscuits together, kind of just very simple, not really anything dramatic. The mindfulness came in a way, in the deep listening that we taught. So the only way you can really listen to the other is if you can look behind their eyes. And looking behind the eyes of the other is mindfulness. It's not just being blocked and being on automatic pilot. You need to actually go out and be aware of the other, of what they're feeling, what they're saying, how they are. And that's basic mindfulness. Be in their shoes is basic mindfulness. And it's, of course, one of the ways that we all can use in our daily life. With a difficult neighbor or a difficult family member, or someone who thinks very different from us politically, if we look and see this person as they are, in a way, peace is made with them. We listen to them, we look behind the eyes, we receive them, we accept them, and we understand them, and we understand their pain. Because a lot of the holding on to positions, and people can be annoying and so on, behind that is often a lot of pain and difficulty, which they're not expressing. They're just projecting it out as hard words and aggression and so on. So mindfulness is allowing us to really look at the needs of the other and their nature, their expression, their difficulty. And that's one of the tools that we use. We have others.
Yes. And sorry, I just wanted to make one comment before you ask your question, which is, I find myself that what's true as well is that if you are holding your energy in a centered and grounded and mindful way, that offers it to the other person to match that. And so one person in a group or in a conversation that's holding that energy in that way helps everyone to match that energy, as opposed to everybody being discombobulated.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most powerful energies that you can work with is actually nonverbal.
Yes.
It's actually invisible, and you can call it equanimity or steadiness. But if you can stay steady in the middle of the craziness of life, of disputes, of anger, of other people's anger, of things that are going bananas everywhere, but you can stay steady in the middle of that. You can emanate that to others. And there's a very small story, if we have time. One time, usually it was very friendly, these meetings, but one time it all blew up, and the Palestinians and Israelis started to scream at each other. And one said, "Oh, you're a terrorist, and you're like this," and the other one said, "You're a soldiers, you're killing our people." And they were shouting and shouting. I felt I'd blown it. I just couldn't hold it. So I sat quietly in the middle of all this shouting on a chair, quietly, until it was over after 5 minutes. I turned to the Palestinian facilitator and said, "I'm sorry, I blew it. I couldn't hold it." And she said, No, your equanimity settled everything very, very quickly. They could have been there for hours kind of killing each other. Your equanimity was like oil on stormy seas. And I hadn't noticed, actually, but it's certainly true that if any of us, we can not put fuel on the fire of dispute and anger, then we are feeding something else.
Yes.
And feeding peace and feeding quiet and feeding steadiness. And we really have to ask ourselves a very, very important question. What are we feeding with the words that come out of our mouth, our presence, our awareness? What are we feeding with this action I'm doing right now? This one, this word, this moment. It's in the present moment.
Absolutely. Very, very important. Corey, you had a question.
Yeah, I did. So with this meditation, you have two people in a room that are like connecting in such a depth. Have you correlated results afterwards with individuals, or is this a long-lasting feeling? How does it transfer into the social structure that they live in?
Well, clearly we weren't, first of all, it's not meditation that they were doing, because there were Palestinians and Israelis that really didn't learn meditation, but we were guiding deep mindfulness. We didn't call it meditation because it would just scared people off. But the Palestinian Authority at a certain point said to us, well, you haven't really done any change. You've come here, for some years, you've bring in groups. What did you do that changed the political? We've still got all the settlements. You didn't remove one settlement from our backs, kind of. And we said, no, we're doing something different. We're doing education. And so what we did feel is that people coming out of these workshops, they no longer looked at the Palestinian or the Israeli in the same sense of a fixed image and a label as before. And so they were able to go out to their community and communicate that the Israelis are not so bad and the Palestinians are not just terrorists and they're ordinary people like you and me. They did communicate that. And I wanted to say one small story. There was a boy who was 10 years old who once joined one of the workshops. And at the end of the workshop, he was crying. And he said, he was a Palestinian boy. And he said, I always thought the Israelis were just soldiers and their hearts were really hard. Now I see you people, and I know that not only you, but everybody has a big heart. That the human heart is not just hard, it's also soft. And this will be with me for my whole life. That's what he said.
Wonderful. Thank you for that story. And we do have to go to a break right now, Stephen. So listeners, you have been tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey and today's guest, Stephen Fulder. We'll be back after these few short messages. Welcome back, listeners. You are tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey. And today we are talking about peace, and we're talking about mindfulness, and we're talking about how the Buddhist Dharma teachings, as taught by Stephen Fulder and in his Tavarna Institute in Israel, how they can help us to bring peace into our everyday lives. So I thought right now, Stephen, what I'd do is ask you about your book. And I know your book, which is called What's Beyond Mindfulness, Waking Up to This Precious Life. It's in 3 different sections, isn't it? Can you perhaps introduce it through explaining the 3 different sections of the book and what
Sure.
the reader's experience is like as they go through that?
Yeah, of course. Well, I have to say, in a bit of background, that there's perhaps 3 waves of the literature on Buddhist teachings and on meditation. There was the first wave of books and literature and so on that was really familiarizing people with something strange and from elsewhere and from the East. And then the second wave came, and it was more, what do we practice? It's still a teaching, a special teaching, but how do we do this, and what do we do, and how we can practice in our life, and how it might help us. And I think my book is really the third wave. And it basically says, these teachings have arrived. They are part of the Western world. They are, I just was talking to people in the UK, that 120 British MPs, members of parliament, have practiced mindfulness. And if you ask them today how it works for them, most of them would say it helps a little bit not to get too caught up in anger and in conflict with other people of different views. It makes me softer. It's out there. So that needs another kind of literature, and I think my book represents that. Where do we go from here? What's beyond mindfulness? So the first part of the book is really looking at ordinary life situations like aging, ethics, money, work, sickness, the kind of things we meet every day, conflict and difficulty, and showing how an open, awakened point of view will change those situations radically, such as making choices, how we make choice in our life. A more inspired, wise view can change those difficult situations in life. The second part of the book is really going into deep practice in different ways, a bit, as I say, beyond mindfulness into very many other kinds of, should we say, in the toolkit, the Buddhist toolkit, what's really there. So that's the second part of the book, which is called samadhi, or practice. And the third part of the book, which goes in a way all the way, what is awakening? What is the spiritual liberation? What is deep equanimity? What is karma? How do we look differently? What does an awakened person do about social injustice? How we go out in the street with this understanding, not just a kind of withdrawal into a perfect place of peace and so on, but how do we go out with it into the marketplace? So that all of that is the third part of the book, which is really about awakening. And I have to say something very, very surprising, that this book, because it's not a beginner's book on what's the first steps in mindfulness and ABC, I thought, well, there won't be that many people will want to read it. I was quite wrong. It came out in Hebrew, and it was the #1 bestseller for 18 weeks in the category of instructional books in Israel. #1 for 18 weeks. I was shocked. And it's not that it told me something. It told me about the need. That today people need another view. They need hope. They need to know that it's possible to, in a way, find peace inside themselves. There are ways to do it. It's not all conflict and anxiety and struggle and competition and money. There's a lot more. And I think this message is sort of the reason people are buying my book, and they need the message. They're really hungry for another message.
Yeah. I also think that there's a readiness in our world today, that people are ready, they're poised. There's more people who are focused on their spiritual evolvement, and on becoming consciously awake and aware, no matter which path it is that they're choosing to do it through. And I want to ask you more about the path that you teach. So you mentioned part 2 of the book is about the Buddhist toolkit. So what can you tell us about, once we get beyond the gateway of mindfulness, what's in the toolkit?
Okay. Well, another tool that is in mindfulness but only kind of hinted is the tool of deep friendliness. And it moves in a bigger sense into compassion. So a deep friendliness is how we stop giving ourselves a hard time, how we stop being judgmental, how we stop being limited and small with ourselves and always choosing the small option, that we're small people, that we're just struggling, that we don't know, and so on. How to be friendly, loving, allowing ourselves to be ourselves. And that's no small thing. And that needs attention. It is in mindfulness, but rather minimal. So that's another tool that's really crucial. And as I say, if we extend that beyond ourselves to others, firstly, it allows us to accept others as they are, to allow others to be the way they are, and then to be able to emanate compassion. And so that's a very important key tool. So we're talking about the heart, not just the mind. And that's the second one. Another place of practice is understanding our powers. So our powers can be energy, it can be joy, it can be our ability to see the way the cells of our body are dancing with life. We meet our thoughts, we meet our inner world. We begin to develop powers, and these powers are powers of awareness. And with these powers, for example, come, as I say, joy. How does the joy arrive? Because we actually see it directly in the very simple things of our life. And that's in a way beyond mindfulness. The garden has a lot of joy in it, and people miss it because one of the problems, by the way, is that quite a lot of people practice mindfulness as a kind of duty. Like, I need to go to the gym to be fit. I need to fix myself. I need to go to the therapists, and I need to practice mindfulness. And it's such a lot of work. I have to keep working on myself, and it's just so much. And here is the joy is missed. So I teach a lot how happiness is something that is actually inbuilt and default in us. It may be covered over, we may have difficult experiences, but we can actually expose the happiness or the basic default joy that's within us, just like we were when we were a baby. We know how to be happy, but we forget. So that's another level. By the way, another thing that we did in the Middle East, which is relevant, is peace walks. And the peace walks were based on a statement that you can't pressure people to be peaceful, you have to demonstrate peace. And we used to do peace walks throughout the Middle East with Israelis and Palestinians, showing what it's like to be quiet and peaceful and friendly. So the tool that we use for the peace walks is demonstrating inner peace, demonstrating that we can be quiet together as a model of peace, Israelis and Palestinians walking slowly through cities and towns, and also basic friendliness to everybody, whether they shout at us or they don't. So that's, I'm just saying that we actually use that on the ground to help in making peace.
So where there's goodness and where there are people trying to bring light into the world, there's the opposite side always trying to bring the darkness back, because that's how they exist in that dark state, and that's how they feel comfortable. What kind of oppression have you had? Like, I'm sure that you've run into for the lack of a better term, conflict with the powers to be in Israel doing this. Have you run into any issues as far as anything to imbibe fear within you, or?
The answer is constantly. We not just run into it once or twice, we run into it all the time. And there is another one of the tools that I want to that I want to talk about, which is the tool of, or the direction of, equanimity. This is a very, very important, and I mentioned it before, very important for us to really understand how to be steady. Never mind if people around us are going crazy, never mind about their anger, never mind if they reject you. I think all of us need to find a steady place in ourselves, even if people around us reject us, even if people around us argue with us. We need to not invest in that, but invest in a steadiness. And that's what we did. So when people shouted at us, if we could answer quietly, we would answer them. We would respond saying, okay, if you've got a better idea to make peace, welcome. Or when we didn't have anything we could say, because they were so invested and so angry and so emotional and their views are very strong, then we simply were equanimous. We were just simply steady. The last words of the Buddha, pretty well the last word, not the exact last words, but nearly the last words of the Buddha before he died, were, be an island to yourself. Be steady, be like an island. That means standing in the stormy seas, steady like a rock. And the seas will, pass by, will be stormy, but they won't destroy you. And he said, the way to be steady, the way to find equanimity is actually, in a way, to be mindful. That means to know what's going on, to know your body, to know your feet on the ground, to know your breath, to know the sky above and the earth below. And just, I want to invite all of you who are listening, just to try that. Next time you're in a difficult situation with somebody, maybe you can go back over that, something that happened to you yesterday, day before, last year, which is a difficult conflict situation. Imagine how that would have been different if you would have been able to stand like an island on your ground and be aware of your feet on the ground and your breath in the body and the words coming out of your mouth and something in your heart which is compassionate and not afraid and aggressive, and just see how the whole thing would have panned out differently. And it will be bound to be different, because it's only ignorance which makes us reactive and automatic. We just react spontaneously from our fears and so on. And the mindful awareness, going to equanimity, is instead of this automatic reactivity.
And this actually holds true for yourself as well. I mean, for those negative thoughts that that the things that just pass through your mind on a constant basis, and that so many people give weight to, that are just things that are going past. And I had a mentor once who used to say, when somebody gives you a hard time of any type, just say, either within yourself or say it verbally. He says, "Thank you for sharing." And that brings you into a calmer state. If you can keep that calm state yourself with that other individual or with yourself, even your own thoughts, when your negative thoughts come up in your own mind, just go, "Oh, thank you for sharing," because that's not the ego that's coming in, as opposed to the true nature of your being, your spirit nature.
Absolutely. And so the first thing that we have to learn is, in a way, to step out of the drama of our own thoughts, and to be able to take a step back and see that we have these thoughts, because mostly people don't notice that they have them. They're just doing them in life and believing them completely. So when you step back out of that movie of your own thoughts, you've got a possibility of saying, okay, but they're just stories and they're just thoughts. And actually, I don't have to believe them 100%. I don't have to follow them. They don't have to rule me. They're just thoughts that are passing by. And then we can also begin to develop, I would say, an interest which is more spiritual, the interest in consciousness itself. And the consciousness is awareness, and the ground of our being is aware. I would ask all of you who are listening, how do you know you exist? It's a stupid question, but it's not a stupid question. How do you know you exist? You know you exist because there's awareness that tells you, I'm here, alive, sitting here on this chair, whatever. That's awareness. So if we can understand a little bit about our thoughts, we can also begin to meet our basic ground awareness, as if it's like thoughts as the clouds passing in front of the sky. The clouds don't hurt the sky. The sky is too big. So if we kind of get a hint of something very vast and pure in the consciousness that is a blessing that we were given, the thoughts will pass by, we'll give them less importance, and they can't damage our basic consciousness like the clouds can't damage the sky.
Wonderful. We're going to go to another break. Listeners, you've been listening to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey, and we'll be back after these few short messages. Welcome back, listeners, to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey, and today's guest, Stephen Fulder. And Stephen has been sharing information from his new book, What's Beyond Mindfulness? Waking Up to This Precious Life. And he's been sharing some of the teachings from originally from Buddhism that we can apply to our own life. And before the break, you were telling us about the toolkit that you talk about in your book, and the practice of deep friendliness, which relates to being in a state of acceptance of everything and everyone, which I think is a wonderful practice. And I really don't, because we've also been talking about change and how to bring peace. I don't think that you can change until you enter a state of acceptance. And so that's a very important practice. And you're also talking to us about, as you go deeper into the practice, how you start to become aware of yourself and aware of your powers and your gifts and your abilities, and the practice of equanimity. And I wanted to, it reminded me of somebody I encountered who was practicing Buddhist teachings. And from my observation of them, I felt like they were stuck. And so I want to ask you about this. So this was somebody whose life was painful and who practiced that path as a way of being detached from his pain. And I felt he wasn't really living his life because he'd stepped outside of his life into this complete detachment. And I wonder if you can comment on that.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the kind of risks in the spiritual world that you must be encountering all the time, and we all are, that the untouched pain, the undealt with pain, the unseen pain, works behind the scenes in the unconscious mind and drives us into all kinds of places that we're trying to escape from it. So, for example, a lot of belief is energized, is fueled, is driven by this pain. We run away from life into belief systems, or we run away from life into withdrawal, as you said, into shutting down. And then people say, oh, well, all these Buddhists really, all they're doing is shutting the door and shutting themselves off, and they're not engaging and they're not helping, and they're just kind of feeling good with themselves, meditating on their cushions and feeling and feeling that they've got superiority. And it's not like that at all. I think the answer is you have to go back to what the Buddha really said and be courageous and honest enough to practice properly and seriously. And the Buddha was really encouraging the meeting with your pain as a fundamental kind of compass that shows you where you have to work. It shows you the pain is there as a message, and you need to listen to that message. In the Buddhist myth, the original myth of the Buddha, he was a prince in a castle, and it's a myth, so we can regard the Buddha's castle as our comfort zone. It's like our comfort zone where we shut the door, turn on the TV, and don't want to know anything. And what propelled the Buddha to go on his journey was the pain that he saw, a dead person, a sick person, and so on. And that propelled him to ask the question, what's going on in this life? And so we need to do that with our pain. And that means to say, okay, I'm ready to face my pain. I'm ready to look at what's going on inside me. I'm not running away from anything. I'm going to meet the pain as kind of like the Buddha did, what you call a heavenly messenger, a messenger from above that says, this is where you have to work. When you start to meet the pain, you can kind of allow your vulnerability. You're not running away from your own vulnerability, but you find that you can allow the pain as an experience that has a beginning and an end, and it's there and it goes, and you begin to see that it doesn't control you. It can be a simple pain like a pain in the body, but you will experience a pain in the body as a sensation that is unpleasant but interesting for you to look at, not to shut it up with an instant painkiller, but to have a look at it, see what it's doing, see where it's going, see what you're doing with it, what you're building out of it, what your responses are to it. And this is the first step in the journey of our freedom. From there, we find spaces, first of all, of non-pain, secondly, of liberation. We find places where we're not attached to the stories that we're telling about ourselves. We're not attached to security and withdrawal and all and belief systems that we develop. We can feel our freedom to dance with change, even if the change is not comfortable to us. But we can still find our freedom to dance with changing circumstances, because we're not in control of life. Life is in control of us. And it's a big mistake to think that we can control things, and basically that leads us back into the castle of the Buddha, shut the door, turn on the TV or the screens, and keep life out. And we need to let life in. And that means, like you said, allowing it to be what it is, be ready to meet it at eye level, and see that it's a transforming, flowing experience like everything else, and not the end of the world, and know our freedom in the middle of pleasant or unpleasant experiences.
Now, thank you. And when we were talking to you at the very beginning of the conversation, you were talking about your personal journey and how you were interested in exploring consciousness. And I wanted to ask you about, I guess I call it kind of like the divine dichotomy, or the divine dichotomies that exist when we go deeply into our spiritual practice, whatever it is. And I know that you talk about duality, which is the physical world, and non-duality, which is the non-physical world. You talk about path and no path. And so can you talk a little bit about these dichotomies that we encounter, and how not to be confused by them?
Yeah. I think that these are dichotomies that we encounter on the journey. They are actually only dichotomies that we make. They're not in life. Life is one. The life has to be one. It can't be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. It's one, and it includes us. So, but on the journey, we can feel heaven and earth, heaven above and earth below, ideal above and perfection above, and difficulty when I go out on the freeway. So we can make that duality ourselves, but it isn't there in the nature of things. So gradually, if we begin to cut through the dualities and begin to see, yes, they're all in the mind. We let go of the mind that is dualistic inside us. We let go of it. We let go of the sense that I'm separate from things. We begin to practice belonging, connection. I'm connected to the tree outside in my window. I'm connected to I have a farm with some chickens and so on. I'm connected to them. They are my friends. We connect to each other. We connect to the earth and the sky. We begin to discover that through awareness or mindful awareness. And then dualities break down. So let's just take the example of the path. At the beginning of the journey, which is like climbing up the mountain, we certainly will have a sense, I've got a journey to travel and I'm down here and the peak of the mountain is up there and I have to slog away and get up there, etc., etc. After a while, we may just say, well, wait a minute, I'm noticing the flowers on the side of the path and they're really lovely. And they're flowers, beautiful flowers, and me, we're together. And you go a bit further and you say, oh, wow, I can see the stones and I can feel my body and I can see the world around, and my body and the world are one thing. And you get to the peak and you find yourself totally in a world of oneness. And in a way, the oneness means, and it's one of the chapters in my book, that the world is looking out of your eyes. It's not that you, as a person, are looking at the world, which is a fixed, frozen, objective reality. It's that you and the world are one. And from that place, in a way, the world is looking out of your eyes. And that's deeply spiritual, deeply universal, and deeply transformative.
I wonder if you can expand on that teaching in a specific way, and I'll explain what I mean. I'm going to use the area of romance and human love as an example, because quite often I see in people, they're tuning into the oneness, and the reality that they're experiencing is clashing with it. So, for example, they have somebody in their life and they feel oneness with that person. They love them. That person came into their life. It was like an old friend returning to them. They instantly fell in love or appreciated, this is someone important for me. They were in touch with the oneness, the energy that we are all one and we are all connected. And then these two people start living out their life dance and their life drama. And it's hard for people to say, on the one hand, I'm tuning into this light, this beauty, this connectedness. And on the other hand, why is this what's happening?
I know. And it's right. And so many couples break up because one or both of them have a kind of big vision and a big soul in a way, and then they crash down when they find themselves arguing about toothbrushes, and it happens so much. Or people have different views. One is spiritual, one is not spiritual, or less, or in another way, or another path, and then they're constantly fighting. And I think that firstly, it's really important to see the pain and not to hide it, not to expect that because you have a spiritual path, you're not a human being, you're perfect, life is perfect. You've got a spiritual path, but you're also a human being, so you can shout at your partner. And you just need to look at that as painful patterns and stories in your mind that you need to deal with. You can't so much change the other, but you can certainly change yourself. And so you need to look at the pain of what you're carrying, your own blind spots that make you reactive to the other person. And then constantly, people ask me, I've been married 40 years, and people say, how is it that you manage to keep, your relationship going for 40 years? And for me, the key is to see the other person as an ocean, not as a wave, and yourself also. In other words, to relate to the other from the highest place. This is not instead of dealing with the pain. It is in addition to dealing with the pain. Keep relating to the other person as an ocean. People are huge people. So we get very much caught in small arguments, and we feel small and we feel contracted. But actually, each one of us is a great ocean. So relating to the other as an ocean is the other part. Thirdly, there are elements in our relationship which are, in a way, transpersonal, which are not to do with the person. The problems are all at the level of the person. What I need, what I want, what I'm afraid of, my childhood reactivities and patterns, the issues that bug me, and so on. These are all from the person. And as I said, the pain needs to be dealt with. We need to look at that as painful and in a way let it go, let it dissolve, let it pass by, not give it power over us. But there's the transpersonal, and here is the love. And the love is basically big. Even if we say, no, it's not so big, I love my partner, but I don't love the neighbor. It's I love my partner, but the neighbor's neighbor's a really annoying person. So there's something fundamentally wrong with that. We need to see love as much more universal, much bigger, and not locked into my needs and my prejudices and so on. So if we do that, we feel that love and our big heart is inclusive, then we'll be less likely to argue and fight with our partner, because our love will be bigger, we'll hold it. It's less personal. So, for example, we might, instead of getting jealous if our partner talks to someone else in the bar, we will just love them that they can go to the bar and talk to somebody. Just by the love will not be destroyed. So we need to kind of go to the transpersonal. And I think also a lot of help in relationships from what we're saying in the spiritual world can come from basic joy. To be joyful with our partners, to go out and do interesting things, not to be too busy working like a lunatic 12 hours a day, so we don't have time for love, but to be careful about that, and not to get caught in those kind of things, but not to forget that a relationship is a beautiful opportunity for joy.
Well, I think that that's a wonderful place for us to conclude our discussion. Joyfulness and lovingness. So, Stephen, if our listeners have enjoyed this conversation and they'd like to know more about you, or they'd like to connect with you, how can they do that?
Well, I have a website, stephenfulder.com, and they can simply send their email through the website. And what's going to be happening is in 1 month or so, I'm going to be issuing 3 online teaching packages, which go quite deeply into these practice questions. The teaching packages are definitely beyond mindfulness. They're more deep. And if you send the email through my website, stephenfulder.com, you'll be on the mailing list, and I'll send you information. And then in May, I'm doing a tour of the United States. The details are also on the site, I believe. Mostly the Bay Area, and then I'm going to Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston. So I'm doing a tour for 1 month, talking at many centers, teaching at many centers all over the United States, or at least in these parts of the United States. So it's just in case you can connect with me through those centers, then we can meet up.
Wonderful. And the book, is that on your website too?
Yes, it is. It's, as I say, as you said, What's Beyond Mindfulness, Waking Up to This Precious Life, published by Watkins, available, of course, through Amazon, or you can order it, I presume, or I hope, in your local bookshop. You can just go in and order it. And I'm hoping that it really makes a change. People need it. And I'm really looking forward for people to be inspired by it and make a change in their lives.
Well, thank you so much. And listeners, you were listening to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey, and tonight's guest, Stephen Fulder.
See you, folks. Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to another Unlocking Your Truth podcast by Dr. Leslie Phillips. For more information, go to our website at drlesleyphillips.com. That's drlesleyphillips.com, where you can ask questions or send her an email, and there's many free gifts on there for you as well. You can also find the questions that were asked during this show at the website on our free card reading podcast page, where you'll find a full list of them. Come back again.